So excited to be able to sit here on the cutting room floor with our guest today. He has edited films like Hearteyes, Companion, the TV miniseries Fall of the House of Usher, and recently brought back to life Toxic Avenger.
Yes, hello.
So please welcome Brett Bachman.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, so let me ask a question. Do you only take movies that are awesome enough to bring to Comic-Con?
It's ended up that way, oddly. I get a chance to work on some really cool, wacky stuff. I think I'm lucky that most of it has real cool characters, stuff that is based and grounded from an emotional standpoint. But I've been really lucky to find a lot of like-minded people in the genre world that like to play in fantasy, play in horror, play in action, and I feel very fortunate to do this for a living.
Is this always a genre you were thinking about doing from a young age?
No, absolutely not. I was terrified of horror, and I mean, I love science fiction growing up, but anything involving jump scares or dread or creepiness, at least in the cinematic medium, I tended to avoid like the plague. I was terrified of being startled. But oddly enough, I was very involved and very interested in books on the paranormal. So books on ghosts, books on haunted houses, books on UFOs. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, which is the home of Bigfoot and home of Sasquatch. Has some of the first UFO sightings ever, like the modern day UFO sightings from like the 1950s and 1940s. And I don't know if that was just kind of around my culture, around my hometown. But there was a seed planted for all of that growing up. It really wasn't until I had discovered filmmaking as a viable career path and had come down to Los Angeles for the American Film Institute for film school and kind of found myself in the big ocean of Los Angeles that I was looking for opportunities as either an assistant film editor or an apprentice or an intern or something. And I was really fortunate that I was able to get my foot in the door after several years of looking with this low-budget fight tournament movie called Raise. That was like a $500,000 action horror kind of adjacent film, and knew nothing about that world, but came in and I hit it off with the director of this movie, Josh Waller. Josh and I developed a rapport pretty quickly, and he invited me to participate in the second movie, this cop drama called Mechanic with Corey Monteith, David Morse, Kieran Hines. And after working on that together, discovering okay, hey, this is something that's going well, I'm starting a brand new production company, and we're going to specialize in art house horror. This is back in 2012, 2013. They wanted to make films like Let the Right One In, that they didn't see that his producing partners, Daniel Noah and Elijah Wood, were not really being seen, made, and distributed to American audiences around this time. And so their mantra was we're going to make the weird movies in the genre space that no one else is greenlighting, that no one else is making. We're going to be proudly niche, proudly specific, and we're going to lean into that. And I went with them for several years, always on a freelance basis, but they kept on inviting me back for the opportunities to meet other directors, to join on their projects, and I quickly, we assembled a filmography of half a dozen films together of Josh, Daniel, Elijah, and me tagging along on these films. It really wasn't until, though, 2017 when I got invited to do this film called Mandy that I found and that went to the Sundance Film Festival and developed this I was very surprised to see it develop this very passionate fan base, and that led to a lot of opportunities, more so in even more opportunities in the genre world, but with outside directors, outside producers. And so even though it was my 12th feature film, it kind of felt like this film is, this is where I can plant my flagpole.
So we're going to jump into some actual editing with Hearteyes.
Yes.
Opening is great. You set up a really sweet rom-com opening that you subvert immediately when the girlfriend yells at the husband, the future husband, about the ring. So you're setting up a rom-com trope, you're subverting it, you're also, of course, they're getting stalked and killed.
Yeah.
What was your process of trying to like having to set the tone for this film?
So opening of Hearteyes was very important that right off the bat, in the first few minutes, the audience knows what ride they're in for. It is a horror film, it's a slasher film, but it's a comedy film as well. We are trying to treat both sincerely and with earnest. So right off the bat, we had to make sure that we're making sure the laughs are working. We're making sure that they're getting, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, that we're teaching them the language of this film, how we're using sound, how we're using music. So like with the very opening, it even comes down to the very opening song with like picking the right needle drop to start this movie. And we were looking for something that, would feel nostalgic, something that wouldn't necessarily feel jokey. We didn't want to feel too meta or like parody right off the bat. We wanted to feel something that was sincere, but something that felt a little elevated. And this piece of this track, this needle drop, just felt perfect for our film. And you're discovering, like, as this couple is kind of interacting with each other, that the language of this movie is a little exaggerated. These people are kind of idiots. They're kind of douches. I'm kind of rooting for them to kind of get their comeuppance a little bit. And then Hearteyes comes out, the arrow pokes this guy in the head, and then we're into like full-on slasher mode. And so Josh Rubin and I, the director of that movie, worked on that opening quite intently to like set that tone right off the bat, make sure that the flow is there, that the stings are working, the scares are working, you're building dread, but you're also knowing when to release that pressure, that valve to elicit that laugh. And that's a fine balancing act.
And from the editing's point of view, it does sound like if you mess up the opening and don't educate the audience to your movie, that's when the movies sometimes fail.
Yeah, and I think everybody that has worked on a comedy can relate to this. There's typically around the first 15 minutes, there's a sense when you're like working on a film where the audience, if they haven't learned the language of a comedy, if the jokes aren't quite working and the pace isn't quite there, they're not sure the tone of this movie, it feels like there's this kind of slow, a little bit of a bumpy road to like really get into the groove of the movie. And so one of the things that we do in the editing room at an early standpoint is to make sure the audience gets this movie right away, like in the first minute. Like, let's teach you what you're in for. Like, we'll work on that opening. Often it'll be the most worked on scene in the film in the editing room, just so you can clearly state what this film is. I had a friend that was doing a movie that was going through a testing process on their film, another comedy, and the opening of this other movie started in a funeral. It started with a person's death, and they discovered that like the audiences were not really getting the tone of this movie, and so they rearranged some of these scenes, and they moved this scene in the funeral to later, or they cut it, and the points that in test screening process went up by 40 points. Like a drastic swing. You're teaching the audience like what this movie is, lean in, you're in for a ride, and so it's so critical to do that off the bat.
But obviously the movie hinges on the romantic relation between Allie and Jay.
Yes.
But everything will fall apart. How do you approach establishing a relation to the great cute, when they meet, marketing meeting from hell, and their first dinner date?
I mean, it all starts with our actors. So it all starts with Olivia Holt, it all starts with Mason Gooding. Like, that is the material that we're working with. And it was really important for all the filmmaking team on this film to treat this romance sincerely. The film contains some elements of parody, sure, but like we're trying to make a romantic comedy in earnest. I mean, the gold star, the North Star we had was Rob Reiner films. It was When Harry Met Sally. It was Nora Ephron films. We're trying to make the audience really feel for these characters. And so it starts with your two leads, making sure that when you're evaluating the footage that is coming in, you are looking at this material and really trying to find the best stuff in terms of chemistry, trying to find moments of sincerity, moments where you're legitimately connecting with the actors on screen. And sometimes, that means sacrificing other things, sacrificing maybe a joke. Maybe that means sacrificing something that might be a bit more broad for something that's a bit more introspective. But you want people to be connecting with your main characters. And so there's a certain level of how broad do we make them, how silly do we make them, that was important. Certainly, that meet cute in the coffee shop, they're bonking heads and there's coffee orders. You want some level of silliness to it. You're supposed to fall in love with these people instantly, and that's a high task to get an audience to connect to people right off the bat. But again, it all comes down to when I'm looking at the footage and making these initial cuts, what am I connecting to? And it's a tough thing because it's subjective. And so when you put something together, you put it in front of the screen, and you're hoping people are also connecting the same way that you are. And like I said, that can be a long investigation process of swapping takes, moving things around, some swapping out the needle drop, for instance. The music that's playing in the backdrop of that coffee shop when they meet was one of my wife's and I favorite songs. It has this romantic quality to it that, I mean, you throw into this scene, it has this quality of lifting the tone of the scene and making everything sweet and a little kitschy, but charming. And that's a quality that we work really hard to manufacture.
And especially in slasher movies, we don't often get a well-developed relationship.
No, not off the bat. I mean, that's also not a lot of that's not a lot of these films' prerogatives as well. I mean, we would really ascertain, if this movie is working, if you are rooting for this couple to get together by the end. Like that was, yes, as a horror film, we want it to be scary. We want you to jump out of your seats. We want the Hearteyes killer to be menacing. We want that score to be threatening and foreboding. And we want you to laugh at the jokes, certainly. But it's really important that, like, you are the spine of this movie. The reason that this movie works is because of our two leads and their chemistry and making you fall in love with them and wanting them to get together by the end. And so you're having all the other obstacles of, a traditional slasher film and a chase film, but you're also making it a courtship film as well. And so how do you find the balancing act of all of that is a thing that we're constantly evaluating.
How fun was doing the sequence with the marketing campaign Till Death?
Oh, God,
that was one of my favorite montages of subverting the rom-com, definitely. Yeah. But was that kind of fun just going on?
That was a blast. That was directed by our second unit director, Lauren Sick, and she had such a fun time with it. And we had such a fun time making that in the editing room as well. I mean, we were throwing big needle drops at that piece of that piece eventually, big Shania Twain type stuff before we settled on where we did. But there was. That was, I think, one of the more fun things on the film to assemble in the first place. And I have to give a shout out to my assistant editors, Lana and Ruben, and Derek, who did a large amount of heavy lifting on that scene to get it across the finish line. But it's one of my favorite moments in the entire film.
It was a great character setup too, though. Again, you're setting up their relationship, so it's actually based on character, not just
It is. You are discovering that Allie has prepared this. She's a marketing executive, and she's prepared this advertising campaign that is really much an insight into her emotional standpoint at that point in the movie. She's very jaded. She's very cynical about romance, about love. You learn that later on in this restaurant scene, kind of her stance on this, and how much that stems from this failed relationship that she's coming out of. But this is an extension of character. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about working with Josh on a film like this is that, yes, you have set pieces and you have some moments are a bit more broad, some moments can be silly, but it's all rooted in character. And so if you have a joke, it's not at the expense of tone, it's not at the expense of pacing, it's something to drive character forward, and we're putting it there as an obstacle for a character to overcome, or vice versa in terms of this commercial, it's exposition.
But it doesn't feel like it, which is great. You're hiding the exposition, I think, really well.
Yeah, that's good writing. I mean, and that's good directing. And I got to give it, that's Josh, and that's Lauren, and that's our screenwriters.
Now, I'd argue that the movie hinges on one key scene. Obviously, when Jay and Ellie break into their own apartment, which has in the key, you're continuing the romance. The funny thing with the dildo, you have a lot of comedy, but you're also introducing Hearteyes.
Yes.
So what was your thought? Because now you're shifting romance into slasher and putting your characters pair. What was the process of this pivotal moment, propelling the movie forward?
Well, one of the big things about this end of the first act twist is that you have to do two things very well. You have to get the audience really rooting for Jay and Allie. You have to really sense that chemistry. You have to sense this budding romance between the two, and you have to really buy into it. It can't feel forced. Can't feel fake. You really got to root for them at this point of the film. And we've had about 20 minutes of them interacting by this point. So that's a big goal. The second thing is that you have to make the emergence of this killer an immediate threat. And the challenge is it's a horror comedy, but how do you treat your villain seriously without pulling the rug from underneath him? How do you make him menacing and yet not make a lot of jokes at his expense? Right. You start, if you had, Ghostface and Scream, and you started him doing pratfalls and slapstick, which they do a little bit of, but he still has to be extremely menacing. Right. So that was very important for this film as well. How do you, like I said, make sure that the romance qualities between Jay and Allie are working, but make Hearteyes, really threatening and ominous. And so that's all about tone, and that's about modulating the music that's in the background, that's about timing of the performances, that's about when to utilize score, and even like tempo and cutting. So like when Hearteyes like bursts out of the closet and is right there with Allie in the background, you know, we're pulling a 180 on the music. We're going from something that's kind of a sweet, gentle needle drop with this tender song to big, bombastic, urgent, life or death music, like right off the bat. And the tempo of the scene is increasing for this fight scene right off the bat, and you're communicating that everything has changed, like immediately, like right off the bat. And so making sure that you are doing that without, like I said, not making Hearteyes cartoonish. You can't make him see, even though you're getting some slapstick elements of like Jay falling, the driver getting shot in the head with the arrow. You're getting some stuff later in the carnival scene with Allie running away from Hearteyes. It's important never to make him feel silly. Always make him feel dangerous. And so treat the horror sincerely, treat the romance sincerely, and let a lot of these comedic interactions be naturally derived from character, or let them be derived from, you know, the form. We do that a little bit on the film as well when we're utilizing sound and utilizing music as a little bit of a meta reference to draw comedy out of as well, but never at the expense of our villain.
Yeah. And one of the tricks that you have to do is, and with little Jordana Brewster's character, trick the audience.
Yes.
Like who the killer is. You have to leave clues behind so we're not totally shocked at the end, but you also have to distract. What was the process of kind of developing that kind of, starting with the precinct scene, like tricking the audience, but also making us, oh yeah, it makes sense at the end of the movie?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that you want most of the audience to be surprised by at the end, the reveal of your killer. And we had more material in the film in these early rough cuts that, you know, teed her up a little bit more as your arch villain. And we generally began to kind of excise that material as we were in the testing process. And we began to kind of ask these, we would have like weekly friends and family screenings in the edit bay. And we'd bring people in, horror fans and non-horror fans, and kind of ask them like, when did you ever think it was her? Did you begin to kind of lean into this idea that like, I know who it is? And a lot of our a lot of our audience members are quite clever, and they're like, I knew the second she pulled up, and the second she showed up, this was where it was going to be. But the vast majority of them were like, okay, I kind of suspected something was going weird by the end of the second act when she shows up after the police station and her arm is in a sling, because we had more material. We had a lot more material of like her surviving the attack in the police station. We had a deleted scene that we ended up repurposing in the finale. We had a deleted scene in the police station after the rampage is completed, and Jordana's down there, and she's bleeding out, and Hearteyes comes down, and he grabs the blood, and he wipes it over her mouth. And people like right away were like, why doesn't he kill her? And the logic of the movie was like, well, he only kills couples, but you've seen Hearteyes kill so many people like in his way by this point anyways. So like for the vast majority of our early test members, like as soon as Hearteyes like let Jordana live, like right there, I think most of them assumed like something's fishy, something's going on. So, I mean, we listened to that feedback and we cut that scene. We ended up putting a repurposed version of that scene back into finale because we wanted to give the audience a little bit more details in our finale about what's the Agatha Christie version of this? Like, how did all these pieces come together? Like, let's see her become the killer. So we moved that later on because it made sense. But it's an evaluation process. One of the things that's really cool about my job, and also kind of frustrating, is that editing is re-editing. And so you are putting something up on the screen, and you are putting it up in front for friends and family and for test audiences, and you're asking them to be brutally honest with their feedback. And so that means going in and killing babies and, you know, removing your darlings and thinking about more abstract ways to present something if something isn't quite working. And we had a few instances of where the audience was getting a little bit ahead of us on this film, and so we had to jump ahead and, you know, use our brains to try and figure out a solution.
I think one of my favorite scenes was the van scene.
Oh yes,
yeah. Because you have so much going on here. You have the couple having sex in the back, but Jelly and A really connecting, and you're actually going to believe at this point they are going to die for each other. They would fight and die for each other. And risk everything. How did you approach capturing this? Because you had to establish a lot, the fun, but a heartfelt moments.
Very much. That is another crucial moment of the film. You know, getting towards the end of our second act, you really have to sense they're the midpoint of this relationship where they're kind of at like that cusp. And so you want to make sure that everything has been building to this moment. They're being sincere with each other. It doesn't feel forced. And so again, that's about Olivia and Mason like connecting on the day in that van and really mining that material to make sure you are like on the same emotional wavelength as they play pretend, and that you're really keyed into this. One of the things that really helps to, I think helps assist this believability and the sense of charm is our drugged out hippie couple in the back having sex.
Yeah.
So the thing about these guys is that, yes, it was scripted, and yes, we knew they were going to be back there. This is just another evidence of like Josh Rubin's kind of expertise and his genius level when it comes to comedy. He saw a rough cut of this, and he's like, this, I talked about how important it was and how much time we spent on the opening. This car scene with the hippies having sex in the back was the scene that we worked on the most throughout the entire editing experience of Hearteyes, because this, like we wanted to be really make sure with Ali and Jay were with them, but it might feel a little saccharine. It might feel just a little too sweet if you didn't have some wasabi, if you didn't have something to kind of offset that. And so with our Greek chorus of our couple in the back, we recorded our poor actors, that hippie couple, I think 2 or 3 times to get the right sounds. We had Zelda Williams, a writer-director of like Lisa Frankenstein. She was the first member that came in to give notes at these friends and family screenings we did. She watched back that scene, and the early version of that scene that barely had our hippies at all. I mean, you maybe heard a few sounds and you heard some like, but not a whole lot of activity. And Zelda's like, you're missing, this is like an opportunity to like really lean in and really do something that is surprising for an audience they haven't seen before, but also kind of, there's an opportunity for comedy that I feel you're sitting on and not quite utilizing. And so throughout the next several weeks of the editing process, like I said, we brought our actors back in, we brainstormed ideas. Josh had very particular things he wanted to hear. He's like, I want springs, I want beer cans moving around. So it became kind of like an all hands on deck with like our Foley team in New Zealand, our New Zealand actors, and an editorial kind of bouncing back and forth these ideas to find a way to, I think, counter a little bit of the sweetness to make it feel a little more, so it's not just like that end of the second act, oh, I lost my rubber ducky moment. Like, let's talk about our backstories. And although we do it sincerely, it's a little bit of a trope. Right. And so we wanted to kind of subvert that a little bit, and yet the impossible task was do it sincerely, make you feel for them, and yet at the same time, we're going to give you this Greek chorus comedy bonanza going on in the background.
Well, I also think there's some drama with that couple, because they actually represent what couples should be. Totally comfortable, in love. Like, they're not hiding their feelings, which our couple is.
Yes.
So I think it was actually a nice little juxtaposition. Yeah.
It turned out great. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and this is something that, like, again, goes back to Josh Rubin, his commitment to like working on something and fine-tuning and dialing in on just the right decibel range, the right sound effect. I mean, we went through so many different sounds of squeaks, so many like the difference between a wah and a is the difference sometimes of a laugh like that. Yeah. He can get so into the fidelity of these little sounds to elicit the right reaction, and nothing. I remember one of my favorite moments in the sound mix was when there's a fart sound in that scene, and we had someone go into an ADR booth, and we did, and we had like a rung out, like a selects reel of like 10 different farts, and I have a video of Josh being like, not that one, not that one. Too low, no, and just picking the right one to go in. If you go too big with it, if it becomes too much to take you out of the scene, it destroys the moment. So finding that wavelength is such a subjective thing, which is difficult because you have no binary right or wrong. It's just what does your director feel in that moment, and that's a balancing act. And that's one of the reasons I love working with Josh, is that he invites us into that process. My entire editorial team to find that balance.
Now, I love ending the movie in the chapel.
Yes.
Because obviously with the romance. Just as a tip, though, I've had girlfriends. Never a good idea to shoot your girlfriend in a hostage situation. Just don't do it. It doesn't work out well. But what would you process at the end? Because you got to put them together romantically, and also have our typical climax with our two, heroes fighting the two Hearteyes.
I think some of my favorite Ali and Jay moments in the film are after our killers are dispatched, and Jay is bleeding out, he's on the bench, and you really see why Olivia and Mason are special actors, why they have this gift. And it's this moment to connect with each other really sincerely at the end of all of this. And for Jay to, you're sensing all of this chemistry in their body language, not so much in the dialogue, but it's in the pauses, it's in the looks, it's in where to put a blink. And to be really, I loved making this because it allowed us to really feel the cathartic release of this film and yet still feel like the stakes were a little bit raised. And that's a bit of a challenging balancing act to find, but we were really lucky with Olivia and Mason to find two that just connected so well together.
And the reality is, we're not just rooting for them to survive, we fall in love too, which is not common for the slasher movie. Obviously, we want them to survive. We care.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a nice little twist where you're putting them together and saving, and they're fighting together. So it was a nice little.
It's a love story. Yeah. Like it is a film that's designed. Like I said, it's Nora Ephron and Ernest. It's When Harry Met Sally. I mean, these are our North Stars. We wanted to make a film where you fall in love with your main characters and you're rooting for them. I always approach it as a rom-com first. Like, yes, it's done in the language of a horror film, and we have a lot of the fun components of a slasher. But at the end, it's about two people kind of overcoming their own beef and initially their dislike of each other, and kind of how they sort of repel each other professionally, but they also have a budding attraction. And how do you navigate that where the obstacle, instead of some tragic backstory or something of convenience, is literal, is the embodiment of death. Like it's about getting the bond over an action film, over a horror experience. And I gotta give it up to these two. I mean, they are not only trying to play survival stakes, but simultaneously they're playing emotional stakes. They're bonding over the course of shooting this movie, and we shoot these things out of order. So like they had to know exactly, on day 18 versus day 15, they could be shooting a scene from the end of the movie versus a scene from the middle of the movie, and be able to track that emotional trajectory throughout, and having us to kind of see that in the editing room and be like, okay, let's make sure this trajectory feels appropriate so we can excise that, recalibrate that, shorten that. I mean, that takes a lot of work, and it's the thing we worked on the most.
Well, speaking of dating and horror and comedy, we're going to switch to some robots.
Cool.
Companion,
romantic robots.
A great blend of sci-fi, comedy, horror, and dating. I love the opening sequence where Iris and Josh meet, but you also have the great moment where she says, "The first day I fell in love with him, the first day I killed him."
Yeah.
Yeah. What went into this opening with that VO to establish a character, tone, and actually Iris's journey for the movie?
That's a great question. So, Drew Hancock, our writer-director on the movie, wrote one of my favorite scripts in years. Like I was sent to it from the producers, JD and Rafi, over at Boulder Light, and they were like, "We're thinking of you for this. What do you think?" And I think I read the entire thing in like an hour and a half, and I was like, I want to find a way. Yes, the answer is yes. We'll find a way to do it. I was immediately taken by it, and I met with Drew, and it was clear he was very protective over these characters, and he particularly Iris. And the initial line that he wrote for this opening voiceover of hers was, "The day he killed me," referring to Josh. And we had that in the cut for a few months. We had the awkward predicament of shutting down the movie halfway due to the SAG strikes when we shot the film. And so we had this version of the movie where Iris says, "The day he killed me," for a few months, and then we went on hiatus, and the film just kind of sat on a server waiting for us to resume work. And we jumped back into it, and we kept on testing. And we went through a few discoveries in this time, a few tonal discoveries. We shifted, I think, some of our approaches to music, our way of thinking about the form of the film in regards to its use of comedy as well, which is another thing we can get into later. But we always wanted to make sure that Iris's journey was very much the focal point of this. We never treat her as a robot. We treat her as a human character that happens to have science fiction qualities to it. So we went in. I talk about on Hearteyes the importance of the friends and family screenings. Companion was no different. So we went into a friends and family screening for Companion, and the first person that raises his hand and says, "I love the film, I have some ideas," was writer-director Mike Flanagan.
Yep.
So Mike came and he says, "Have you considered changing that opening line of narration from the day he killed me to the day I killed him?" And everyone kind of looks around and we're like, "No, we have not considered that idea." And I think Drew was like, "That's interesting. Let's sit on this." And we began to kind of kick the idea around. And we tried a version and we changed it. And I've heard, I love this example as a question you bring up, because it's something that, I mean, we talk about the importance of kind of setting the rules of the movie in the first 5 minutes. What are we sitting down for? The line, "The day he killed me," it sets up certain expectations. It sets up that Iris is the victim in this, and her boyfriend, we're now immediately cued into like Josh is the villain. Josh is going to turn on Iris, and he's going to attack her. So your experience over the next few minutes of the movie is, when is this attack going to happen? How is it going to happen? How is this romance that seems, you know, maybe a little, not one-sided, but Iris clearly likes him a lot more than he likes her. That doesn't seem quite, oh, okay, well, how is this going to happen? And so then the film follows a plot line that is a little bit more traditional. But if you change that to the day I killed him, now your first impression is of Iris, who is someone very sweet, very docile, clearly very in love with, clearly very infatuated with this guy. And you tell the audience, she's going to turn. Something is going to happen where this person who has been so infatuated and so innocent looking becomes a murderer. Like how? And then you meet, and you have the next few scenes with the wonderful Sophie Thatcher, and it's like, this doesn't make sense. Like, so now, instead of kind of waiting, like, okay, yeah, let's see how Josh kills Iris, now it's, this doesn't make sense. How is Iris going to do that? And so we found it kind of made you lean forward a little bit. You begin to kind of question this trajectory, like this, where does this go? And we found that it had a way of making the audience connect with this lead character faster. It raised a bigger narrative question at the onset. And overall, I think it was a really good note. I think it helped the movie quite a bit. Not to say that there's not a good version of the movie with the other line, but like it would not have been our final film.
And too, Jack Quaid had some interesting things to pull off too, because you have to, in his performance, you have to believe Iris is with him and loves him. Laugh in the scene where she's not sharing in the sexual climax.
Yeah.
But overall, you don't want him to be revealed as a villain too much.
No.
But you don't want to shock us. So what would you approach in Act 1 of specifically establishing his character to make sure audiences are kind of like, yeah, we like him.
Yeah.
But, you know.
So that's a great question as well, because that's something that also changed in the editing process as well. Jack and Drew modulated that performance during the production, like during the shoot. We got takes of Josh being a little bit more sweet, a little bit more caring, and we got takes where Josh was a little bit more of a dick. So we can modulate, and I think that's something that Drew and Jack talked about, and that's something that we certainly experimented with in the editing room as well. So back in an earlier version of the movie where we had the day he killed me, you know, our initial impression of Josh might have been a little bit more abrasive. Maybe he was a little harder for that to kind of make sense. And again, that was something that we found in the test screening process with audiences, that when you introduce this boyfriend who is not, just his behavior seems weird around her, they don't really seem like a couple. And so there was a disconnect happening, and not necessarily in a good way. People, you know, they were like, I found it hard to kind of buy into the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie because I'm not fully buying it. And so we ended up going with performances where he was a little bit more lovey-dovey, a little bit more of a dork, a little bit more sweet, to make that trajectory and that character growth a bit more dramatic. It gives Josh more, I think it makes him a little bit easier to connect to. It allows you to empathize with him. Although Josh does turn villain right away, we never set out to make him an arch villain right off the bat. You have to believe that there's a version of the Iris and Jack or Josh that they somehow work. Like it's an android and it's a dude with a sex bot. Like you have to mention, like there's a reason that there's a version of this relationship that, you know, maybe it's toxic and it doesn't fully work, but it's existed, I should say. You know, Josh has hired Iris for a reason, and so you want, I think, to kind of feel that loneliness, that desperation, that sadness in his performance, and then as Iris begins to express herself and emancipate herself from this toxic relationship, you begin to see Josh's true nature, which is someone that's very bitter, has a lot of ego issues, that feels like the world's looked him over, and although he does very terrible things by the end of the film, when you reveal kind of this rotten core at the middle, we don't want to set out and say at the beginning, like, this guy's bad. Like, you want to be able to connect with him in some way. So I think you're a little bit more emotionally involved as this film progresses and goes down its steps.
So you also had an Act 1 challenge where Iris kills Sergei. In a great scene. And then also, the blood and we reveal that she's a robot. What went into that sequence? Because again, this is a turning point for the movie, and you have to reset a lot of stuff. Yeah.
So I talked about this on Hard Eyes a little bit, but same with Companion. The end of Act 1 are very important things. This is the scene we worked on the most in Companion. the end of Act 1 with killing Sergei. And we're approaching it from a point of a tension scene, of when to build up tension, and also when to kind of build up enough intrigue and interest and enough narrative questions that springs you off into the second act, that hopefully buys you a lot of interest and intrigue. And that is the reveal of, like, she's a robot, the Iris go to sleep. You don't reveal that she's a robot. You reveal that, like, she's being controlled by Josh somehow. What does that mean? It could mean something else. But we went through several different versions of the Sergei sequence of when to stay down with the attack or when to intercut. We had other versions of the scene where we only hint at the attack and we pop back upstairs and reveal Iris covered in blood. We had other versions of the scene where we played out the attack in a linear form entirely on the beach, and then we only cut up after Sergei is stabbed in the neck and killed. So that, when I say it was worked on the most, it was worked on because we didn't know when to intercut upstairs and when to stay down below. And that was a question that we were asking our friends and family. That's a question that Drew and I are discussing back and forth. That's something that my co-editor, Josh Ethier, and I talked about as well, and he worked on with Drew. And so it's a question of when does that pressure become too much for this film? It's an assault scene, it's harrowing, but when does that become too much that you kind of disengage from the movie? So that became a question of when do we feel like we've reached a nice point where we built enough pressure and you've kind of plateaued that you can go somewhere else? And when can we cut upstairs maybe to relieve that tension a little bit? And that's where we go to Harvey Guillen. And Harvey's like telling this story up at brunch, and we had him improv so many different stories about, you know, his hangover and about these stories about, you know, in New York or whatever. There's like 10 different versions of that. And ultimately we used, I think, one of the more concise versions because we have to keep the plot moving and the story moving. But if we ever release a blooper reel of the film, like, there's great stuff in there. Yeah, again, it becomes when do you keep the plot going and versus the story moving versus when do you kind of take a moment to breathe and build up tension? And so that's just trial and error, back and forth. And again, with the eyes going white at the very end, in the intercut of that, of the violence and the attack down on the ground, it's trying to stay one step ahead of the audience, trying to stay ahead of their expectations. And so when those eyes go white, when Josh says, Iris, go to sleep, we cut the black. We don't give them the ability to linger on that shot, to question what happened. We cut off the black right away. We don't explain what happened. And then we just come in later on a slow push, on a dolly, on her white eyes, and we don't tell you what is happening. We let you then kind of catch up to us. And we found that moment in the theaters was such a wonderful thing in our test screening process. Yeah. When that happened, for some of these early audiences that hadn't seen the trailer, didn't know the premise of the movie, shouts, erupts, commotion. I think one of my favorite responses was in a room of like 200 people. Can I swear?
Yes, we
where
are
the light,
on YouTube.
like, Iris go to sleep, boom. Yo, what the fuck? Someone in the audience somewhere. And yeah, we worked really hard on that sequence, and I'm very happy to see that it appears that it's working.
I did like, though, but now we got to reset Iris 2.0. Really, yeah. She's a different character. And I love that little line she says when she comes up with a plan and the car says, terrific plan, Iris.
Yeah.
There's some really sweet moments and great comedy when it's not me, it's you line. But what was your thought? You have to reset Iris now. Mm-hmm. What was the process of kind of like reestablishing a new character?
So this took a little bit of trial and error as well. So when Sophie and Drew first conceptualized this scene, they had an idea to kind of do this like tree of life style thing, where after that intelligence is set up to 100%, we have a deleted scene where we went a lot more expressionistic and we went handheld, which we had not really done at that point in the movie. And ultimately we decided to cut it. Drew was like, I think I've seen this version of the movie before, and I think it's kind of slowing us down. And we get this next scene of Sophie at the car, up on the cliff, talking about all these possibilities about, okay, what do I do now? I could walk home. It's going to take several days. I can't go to the police. And so one of the things we found by deleting and excising this naturalistic kind of Terrence Malick-inspired scene was that now you're experiencing her new intelligence through all these hypotheticals, and all these fun hypotheticals, like all these kind of comedically tinged scenes of her, I go home and Josh is there and he has a revolver. I go to the car and the car opens up and allows me to go home, and you feel this sense of, I guess, charm with her, the sense of innocence with her that we found, and that was your first impression of Iris 2.0, and we found that really drew you into the character, but it also kept the movie going, which is, that's a a bird with two stones? Or no, the other one. One rock, two birds.
I usually do two birds and one stone.
Two birds, one stone,
People.
yes.
This confuses people.
Yes, that makes more sense.
But all right. But there's one sequence I like particularly that has pivots, comedy, drama, tension, and relief.
Yeah.
This sequence where Patrick and Eli chase Iris.
Oh, yeah.
But you also find a loving relationship, which I found brilliant between Patrick and Eli, a robot, and I thought that was really sweet. And then, of course, Iris winds up killing him. What was it like constructing that sequence? Because you are doing a lot of things in that brief moment.
Yeah. So this was another thing we worked on a lot, and it all comes back to tonal switches. It comes back to following your actors and staying just ahead of the audience a little bit. So they are following, but they're also surprised as well. This is where I got to tee up our great composer Rishi to work on to find the right tonal balance for this score. It's propulsive, but it's not necessarily too leading. I got to give a shout out to my assistant editor Noah, who helped me build some of these early scenes as well. And this is about making sure we're connecting with the actors first and foremost. So you're following their journey. You're making sure that you're going a little bit more subjective with your point of view here. So you're experiencing things with them in real time. So you're not kind of taking this overall objective stance and showing you everything that's occurring simultaneously. We're only learning what these characters are learning at the moment. So if a good thing is one of the scenes I love is Iris in the car resetting this voice stuff, discovering what's going on. For a moment, we've been with Iris so long at this point in the movie, we break point of view here and we shift to Josh. And so when she gets this idea to start trying out new pitch voices, you don't know what she's doing at first. The point of view of the movie has switched to Josh, and so this thing she's doing seems mysterious and odd. And you discover what she's doing only at the same time that Josh knows, which I think found you. It made Iris seem clever. It made her seem smart. It made her seem like she had agency. But now it gives the scene a certain degree of urgency. Oh, this is what she's doing? Well, she's been doing it for 15 seconds already. I'm way behind. I got to catch up. So finding when the audience, relying on the characters, following their point of view was something that we looked at a lot to just draw you more into the movie. I mean, giving you all the answers right away doesn't make necessarily a better story. Finding narrative intrigue, creating the good kind of confusion draws you in. It keeps the momentum and the intrigue there.
Now, the great face-off of the dinner table scene, Iris is getting agency. She's
Yes.
calling Josh out, for being mean, small. Well, Penis was a very funny line. But also, Josh is ramping up because he burns her and winds up killing her. What were your thoughts on that scene, really their big battle, to study their big battle?
So by this point in the movie, we really want to communicate and portray Josh's level of depravity. We want to see this guy for this embittered, cruel, antagonistic individual. And by this point, there is no ambiguity about, the moral standings of either character. You know what Josh wants. He wants control. You know what Iris wants and needs. She needs emancipation. She wants control. She wants autonomy. And then, again, that is really, really well portrayed by Jack and Sophie. And so this is a case where we're kind of allowing the characters to kind of chew the scenery a little bit. we're going to lean in and make Josh just the most despicable as possible, because at this point, this is not the end of the movie. We still have another 20 minutes to go. And so we want to build up Josh as more of a villain if we can. So this is a case where we're leaning into some takes where he might be a little bit more broad. He might be a little bit more arch. And vice versa, we're leaning into the stuff with Sophie, where she is really trying to exert control and trying to exert herself in her independence. And yet it's important that, she doesn't fully have command of that yet. She still has somewhere to go. She hasn't reached, the end of her journey. So you still want to give her something to struggle against, but you have to make Jack seem all-powerful. You have to make him seem like he's fully in control. So finding those takes, finding those opportunities to make him seem just devastating. And that goes into the tempo of how long do you hold her hand being burned. There was a version of that scene where we could do that shorter. I don't know if we could really do it longer, but it was important that we do that, pretty long to really sense that cruelty. You could make it shorter, but it just you wouldn't feel that how dark he is and how far he's fallen.
And I think it created great tension for the end of the film, their final battle, because we're still not sure if Iris can actually kill him. We still that great line is I know you still love me and you won't do it. What was your thing trying to get the audience to still doubt, will she actually pull it off? And of course with the corkscrew she does.
Yeah.
What was your thoughts about trying to scare us into thinking that what was going to happen?
I think it's twofold. I mean, one, you have the linear plot, which is there's the programming component, and there's the rules of the movie that we've kind of established. And yet there's also, I think, the deeper, more the things about her core values or her core beliefs. I mean, this is someone that was, like I said, we approach Iris as a human character. And so it's hard to kind of completely eradicate any feelings you might have for someone, in the course of one day. And even though it's kind of life or death, we wanted to make it seem that she's choosing her old life and her new life, and there's remnants of that old life that still are there. And that was really, really important to her. That was her defining characteristic. And so it made sense for us as filmmakers to leave that little kernel of her down there to show that she's not a murderer at heart. She's not cold-blooded. This is not AI gone wrong. This is a character that has experienced a lot of tragedy and trauma over the last few hours, and she's doing the thing that just a few hours ago would have been it's been a complete 180 on her character. So it was important to us to show that tenderness and that sincerity a little bit, without making a completely bad guy good guy at this time.
Well, I have to say, my last relationship ended the same way Josh and Iris's did. So you nailed it. Like, that's exactly accurate. I was more in the Irish position, but I really respect that.
Yeah.
So then, the last question is the typical Frankenstein ending is the monster gets away, AI, robot, whatever it is, and destroys the world. You have an optimistic ending where she's going out into the world, but not to destroy, to be free. What was always your thought, like, let's land on a positive note and kind of like the trope what we're expecting?
Very much. I mean, that's the movie Drew wanted to make. Drew wanted to make a movie about a young woman finding emancipation, finding her voice. This young woman happens to be a sentient robot, an android, but we never thought of her as a robot in the movie. I mean, there's rules that she has, like, I don't bleed real blood. Like, my brain is not up here, my brain's down here. So she's not exactly like us, but from her emotional standpoint, we treat her very much as a person. And when we think about her as a person. And certainly, I think Sophie played her as a woman. And so I think that's in the DNA of the movie to begin with. I mean, when Drew set out to make this movie in the first place, I mean, the framing of this film was initially with the Josh character, with the other characters, and Iris was the baddie. Iris was the character that turned bad. And I think as he was writing, he realized, I am connecting more with the nervous robot at the house party more than anyone else at the party, more than anyone else in the story. So he reframed the point of view of the story to make it all about this young woman finding her voice, finding autonomy. And like I said, just so happens that she's a robot.
Cool.
So that was always the ending.
Well, I mean, thank you for coming and for our audience this is a masterclass in editing. We really appreciate breaking down the films, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Comic-Con.